All right, what's going on? Welcome to Insight with Irv. These are 6 things that I wish I knew sooner. Sometimes you are going to get to a point in your life where you just think to yourself, man, if I only had that information when I was 23, I'd be further along. If I only knew this by the time I was 40, I'd be exactly where I need to be at this moment. And so I want to share with you 6 things that I personally wish I knew sooner. I hope that I'm able to transmit any form of wisdom or value to you from this episode that maybe can save you a month of time, a year of experiences, or even 10 years and help you speed up your learning curve. So let's get right into it. The first thing that I wish I knew was you're only going to have a handful of people who will continue to level up with you. There's only going to be a handful of people who are going to level up with you, and you have to be able to come to terms with that. That's going to be people that are going to want to stop drinking. That's going to be people that are going to want to get married and settle down. That's going to be people that are going to want to maybe build a business. That's going to be people that are going to want to climb that corporate ladder with you. Whatever your goal is, you're going to want to find people that are essentially running that same race with you, because it is going to make it a little bit easier and it's going to make it a little bit less grueling. Now, it's not completely going to take the difficulty away, but there's nothing better than being able to connect with someone, especially if you are a married man watching this podcast and maybe he's been married for 10 years and you're on year 1 and you see that for the most part he has a healthy marriage. There's nothing that's going to be better than to ask him, hey, what are some things that, because obviously every marriage is different, but what are some things that maybe you worked on in your first year that maybe I can plug into my marriage right now? Rather than asking that one friend who's constantly sleeping around, rather than asking that one friend who's constantly in the club every single weekend. They're not going to have any context, and they're not necessarily going to have any vision or rail or guardrails around giving you, or rather, they shouldn't have any permission to pour into you from the aspect of what a strong marriage should look like, because they don't have that. Now, that may be some strong views for some people. I see it the same way of I don't ask for money advice from someone who's poor. I don't, and I also don't see it if someone should ask me how to make $1 billion because I haven't made $1 billion yet. So it's a two-way street. You have to be selective with who you allow to keep into your life. I have a saying, and it goes like this. It's not mine. I heard it somewhere. Is family you were born with, but your friends you actually get to choose, and they end up becoming your family. And I mean that in the strongest way, especially when you're growing up in a certain area code, or you have maybe a zip code, maybe people that are just constantly around you. We start to adapt their philosophies. We start to think like them, talk like them, dress like them. And so these are one of those variables that you can control in your own life. The second thing that I wish I knew sooner was if you don't hate it, you will tolerate it. This goes for attitude. This goes for mediocrity, and this goes for how you're building and how you're running your life. If you don't hate something about a situation that you're in, and these are things that you can control. I'm not talking about, if you lost a loved one, obviously that's going to be a situation that unfortunately you're just going to have to grieve through that and you're going to have to work through that. I'm talking about if there's something within your control and maybe you hate how you're always have just enough money at the end of the month to pay your bills, pay your car note, and you don't have enough to maybe go out on a nice date, or you don't have enough money to invest back into your business. I'm here to tell you that these are variables that you can possibly change, or not possibly, these are variables that you can definitely change. What do I mean by that? You don't hate it enough. Obviously, if you hated it, then you would find a way. And I know that hate's a strong word, but I want to create a strong contrast here. Is if you hated it, then you would find any way possible to, how can I save more money? Okay, well, there's some subscriptions that I have right now that I don't even use. Okay, here's an extra $100 that I ended up finding out of nowhere. If maybe you have a skill set that's been dormant, and I talk a lot about skills on this podcast just because I think that it's the fastest thing that you can control to ultimately scale your income. If there's a skill set that's dormant and you're not using it for whatever reason, you're leaving a couple $100 maybe on the table every single week that you can be picking up, or a couple $1,000s a month that you can be picking up, or a few $100,000 that you can be picking up just off of a skill set. Now, obviously, I'm not going to dive into the type of skill sets in this podcast, in this episode, because we've talked about that in other episodes. But you need to really hate something in terms of not a person, I'm talking about a situation about yourself that you can control, because it's going to allow you to get angry about it. Anger is an energy. Now, you do want to channel it correctly because it can turn over to the dark side, but you want to use that dark side into your advantage and say, you know what? Enough is enough. I'm tired of not having enough money. I need to stop. Let's keep it practical. I need to stop maybe ordering food. I need to save that extra $300-400 a month so that I can pour it into maybe better products into my business. I need to stop possibly maybe gossiping or allowing people to gossip around me because it's taking my mental focus away from maybe building my mental fortitude or my mental strength on things that matter more. Like instead of gossiping 20-30 minutes with my buddy, those are maybe 20-30 minutes that I could have dedicated into maybe learning or reading a new piece of material, or maybe pouring that back into a healthy conversation with my wife or my significant other. The third thing that I wish I knew sooner, this is a big one, is focus on one money maker versus 1,000 little streams of income. This right here, it took me far too long to realize this one. So if I had to put a little asterisk, it would be on this one right here. I was scrolling through social media and I constantly hear, and I know that, and I know that you hear it too. Hey, just go ahead and build up multiple streams of income. Hey, multiple streams of income. The average millionaire has 7 streams of income, 8 streams of income. While that is true, they built their fortune originally from one main money maker, whether that was a career, whether that was their business, whether they were a original shareholder in a company that they decided to go on a partnership with, whatever that is, they then saved those funds in excess of what they had, and then they either reinvested it back into their business because it was a cash flow machine, or they started saving it from a career that they had and they started reinvesting it back into real estate. They started reinvesting it back into stocks. They started reinvesting it back into maybe another company that they wanted to start and just, again, take equity on. Whatever that is, they didn't all of a sudden start having 7 streams of income. They dialed in on one. And this took me a long time to understand because I almost see it like an arrogance where we think that we can have 5 or 6, 7 different businesses when we're starting out. And we think that we're going to take all of them to $1 million. And what we don't realize is that there's one person out there, there's really a couple of people out there that all they're doing is eating, breathing, and sleeping and thinking about that one industry or that one business. And so think of it like this. Think of the last time that you saw an athlete that dominated 3 sports at the same time: baseball, basketball, football. Think of that for a second. And if you don't have an image of that, it's because they're not out there. They don't exist. Usually those people, especially even if they're talented, they're gifted, they're highly skilled, they're picking one avenue because they know they're going to be able to go all in on that skill to compete at the highest level versus other people that they're just diving in to that skill. So whenever I'm talking to someone and I hear them say, oh, I want to open up my barbershop, but I also want to invest in real estate, but I also want to start an ad agency, but I also want to build up a social media brand, and I also want to sell products on eBay, I already know they're going to fail. And I know that that's harsh, but I think that that's the reality that people need to face. And what ends up happening with us is that we think, okay, let me throw 5 things up, expecting one thing to land, versus let me just go all in on that one thing. And if it doesn't work, I'll keep making iterations to it. Keep this in mind. Anytime that you start over on something, you're going to have to start over on that skill that you're learning. You're going to have to start over on that new marketplace that you're trying to grab attention in. And you're going to have to start over on the time horizon that it's going to take. So if it was going to take you 5 years into the game and you're already 3, you've already shed off 3 years. Now you just need 2 more to potentially hit that cap. Versus if I'm starting all over, that means that there's new players to a new game that I don't understand fully yet that I now have to face. And so you just end up jumping from industry to industry and it doesn't end up serving you. Number 4, networking events are pointless when you know how to provide value at scale. Say that again, networking events are pointless when you know how to provide value at scale. I know that this is going to piss some people off, but it's the reality. Most of the networking events that I went to were just people in there that were doing one of 2 things. Number 1 is it was a hookup fest where they just wanted to meet the hot girls, or they just wanted to honestly just have a one-night stand. I'm calling it like I see it. And they would go there, they would have a couple of drinks, and then you'd see these people leave together. No business was actually done, at least not the one that was going to make you some real money. The second thing that I saw were people, they were just having a show-off contest of who ended up having the most sales, who was the biggest. At the time, it was real estate. Who was the best real estate agent in this party, in this networking event? It was really a party in this networking event. Who's the one with the most sales? And you saw all the other agents kind of sucking up to like the top 3 or 4. And I would just sit there and I would think to myself, man, these people aren't doing anything productive here other than trying to suck up to an agent, which, by the way, you're not going to end up selling them another house because they have their own license. So what are we even doing here? And then I started noticing that even at these networking events, no one was providing any real value. They were just there hanging out and complaining about how bad the market was. And so when I started tapping into social media, I started noticing that you don't have to go out there and try to network with a ton of people, especially people in your industry. I think that there's a time and place for it. But for the majority of the time, especially if you're trying to almost build essentially build a magnet where people come toward you, then having value at scale where people know where to find you, people like you, people trust you, and they taste your content. So now they know, man, this is somebody that I actually want to vibe with. There's somebody that I actually want to rock with. I can't tell you how many times after coming to this realization, I had people that were levels ahead of me after seeing some of my content that would say, I like your style. Can we collab on something? Or I like your input on this. What are your thoughts on this? And so just naturally and organically, that relationship started forming versus trying to force it at a networking event where you're going to walk out with like 1,000 business cards, not remember much, and possibly leave with the hangover if you're drinking at those. Number 5, take your own advice. I've come to the realization that most people don't need more mentors. I've come to the realization that most people need more action. If you ask 5 people right now, mentors, quote unquote, coaches, about your situation, you're most likely going to have 5 different answers on your situation. And so the inverse of that is if you were to ask maybe 1 or 2 people that are ahead of you, have enough context around your situation, and you would throw in your own thoughts and opinion on your own situation, because if you think to yourself, you're possibly good at giving advice to other people, but you just don't end up taking your own advice for whatever reason. And I have a theory behind that. I'll give you here in just a second. Then you would be far further than you are now. And so I see this as the Solomon paradox, where if you're not familiar with what that is, the Solomon paradox it comes from King Solomon, who was the richest and wisest man to ever live, found in the Bible, right? So God blessed him. He pretty much asked for one thing, and he says, if I can have one thing, it would be wisdom. So God granted him that. Okay, cool. You have that. And kings and queens would come to the land to ask him how to run their government. Kings and queens would come to the land to, hey, how are you reigning in a way that in Solomon's entire time, there were no wars, fun fact. And so wars in the entire time that Solomon was there was non-existent. And so people often say that Solomon was wealthy. I'm going to put this into context. Solomon was so wealthy that sometimes the Bible describes him as he was the economy, just to keep that into context. So if you think of somebody rich, like this guy would blow him out the water, so to speak. And so with that said, is the Solomon paradox was he was so good at giving advice to other people, but he was terrible at giving and keeping his own advice to himself, which is why one of the biggest things that ended up being his detriment was his lust essentially for money, his lust for women, which is the thing that he would typically have guardrails around if you read Proverbs and if you read Ecclesiastes, right? And so the Solomon paradox, the way that it ties in with us is, and this has been studied, is that we're so good at giving advice to other people that we don't necessarily end up getting it for ourselves. And so if somebody asks you, hey, so do you think that I should take this job, or do you think I should start this business? Or what do you think? And all of a sudden you give them advice and they're like, oh man, thank you so much. And you're thinking to yourself, man, that was really good. Like if only I could do that, right? And I think that my thought behind this, not necessarily backed by science, just me thinking deeply about this, is the reason why it's so hard for us to take our own advice is because we're with us 24/7. And so to everyone else, they only see a glimpse of who we are. And so they may just be catching us at that instance where we're maybe giving some good advice to them and they think, man, this person is really smart. But to us, we think, man, I'm with myself 24/7. I know my flaws. I know my deficiencies. I know what scares me. And so I'm a fraud. And so you end up battling the advice that you give with the person that you are. And so that's why it's hard for you to accept your own advice, because it's packaged with your own insecurities. And so that's kind of like my thoughts on it. And then number 6 is no one is paying attention to you So this means that you have the freedom to screw up. This was one that when I realized it, I thought to myself, man, this was so needed, because I remember when I first started posting on social media, I would think to myself, man, what if so and so sees this? Or man, if this video flops, what if, that person that said, hey, why are you even creating content? That doesn't pay the bills, or hey, that doesn't really do anything, right? Like, you're not really an expert on what you're talking about. And so I would hear that, and I would have those voices in my head sometimes when I would create content, and I would think to myself, no, dude, you know what? This is my show. This is my game. I'm playing by my own rules. And so if God called me to this, to have a voice, to have the platform that I have that I don't take for granted, then I would be dismissing God from the responsibility that he's placed on my life. So even if my content, let's say, only reaches 100 people, I always have the comparison of, if you had 100 people right now in this room, right, that's like a 10 by 10, if that, then they wouldn't be able to fit. And so even if a video got 100 views, dude, you got to speak to 100 people. Like, really conceptualize that for a second. And so I started noticing that I was really just confronting myself for the content that I just didn't think was good enough, or the content that I just didn't think would reach the audience that I thought it would reach. And lo and behold, I mean, we've been doing pretty well, and we're continuing to grow. And even some of the people that said, hey, why are you doing that, now ask me for advice. And I give it to them of, hey, this is what I've done. This is the route that I've taken. And I don't throw it back into anyone's face of, hey, you didn't believe in me, right? Or you thought that this was dumb. And now they're saying, well, that's pretty cool. I saw that one piece that you put out that really spoke to me. And so even just hearing that has been pretty cool. Not that their opinions matter, but just hearing that the content of the realness that we try to bring on this podcast is reaching the right people. And so you have to give yourself permission to fail. You have to give yourself permission to know that everyone is out there trying to figure it out as well. And so they're more concerned about how they look than how you look. You may think that everyone's concerned about you, but if you ask people right now, especially if you're into content creation, do this. Ask them, hey, what were my last 4 posts about? They probably won't be able to tell you. And then if you don't create content and you're listening to this, go to people that you think care about you enough to constantly think about you, and ask them, hey, what were the last 4 outfits that I wore? And they possibly won't even remember what you wore. And the reason for that is because you're really just playing a game in your own head of what you think people are saying about you. And so you're scared to try new things because you think that they're going to point at you, but really they're just hovering in fear about themselves, projecting it out to you. So my last piece to that is continue to play your game by your rules, because it'll take you far further faster. So if you found value in this content, consider hitting that subscribe button down below. It would mean a lot to us. We don't run any ads to these episodes, so it would mean a lot to us if you share this with a friend. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review if this spoke to you. If any of our episodes speak to you, that's the only ask that we have, so that our platform can continue to reach a larger audience. Other than that, I appreciate each and every single one of you that decided to tune in today. Until next time, everyone, I will see you in the next episode.